true horror doesn't just come in the form of ghouls and ghosts. No, it's something that comes deep from within, from disturbed individuals and their creations. And I'm not just talking about some Dr. Frankenstein individual here who merely created a monster. No. Today we talk about the true horror of creation. Today we're going to talk about the pure, unbridled cringe that is U19. Full name, Under 19, abbreviated to U19. Start date, February 13th, 2017. End date, June 12th, 2017. Total chapters, 17, compiled into 3 volumes. Take note that U19 was also under 19 chapters. Yuji Kimura debuted in the manga world with his one-shot in the Autumn Jump Next issue of 2012, named Electric, and then the next autumn in 2013 with Baby Boo. 2014 would then see 2 one-shots come out in Weekly Shonen Jump, issues 17 and 50. Peach Pluck came out first, featuring a fairy tale-esque art style, and being about the discovery of an Onigashima equivalent island, which once reached unleashed yokai into the world, many of which who would want to harm the descendants of Momotaro from Japanese myth and legend. And then Garden, the second one-shot, is a post-apocalyptic story set in a world where plants known as Viscars have the ability to take on human bodies as hosts. It actually sounds pretty close to 2023's Wild Strawberry, which is currently ongoing. Overall, I couldn't find much on these, especially in the way of actual pages for these manga, which is bound to happen as Yuji Kimura isn't a big artist by any means and hasn't had any major hits. But this does bring us swiftly onto his first serialization, U19. The year is 2036. Japan is governed by the Adult Party, a group that took over in 2020 and reformed the country, who believe that it's human nature to be depraved and thus rigorous discipline must be maintained, which often takes the form of rigid conservative ideals. A person must behave in a certain way. Boys shouldn't be feminine and have hobbies like sewing.
Oh dear! No! Stop! Ah!
Right. Extra noses pounces on you. Ooh, you're so warm.
Personal accessories are forbidden, and everyone should be right-handed. Should you break these rules, you will begin your descent down the path of a failed adult, and what's more, violence seems to be a common punishment even within schools. People are also ranked. By age 20, a selection will take place, which takes into account your grades, behavior, and other characteristics, which will assign you a letter grade. Higher grades make you an elite member of society, and as you go down the ladder, more and more gets restricted to you. Perhaps if I was a more studied individual, I would dare explore the exact ideologies being presented here and analyze them in depth. However, we are talking about a manga called U19, which presents these ideas in a very clunky way. A great example of this clunk is its main character, Eiji Kudo, and I'm certain he's named that because Eiji Kudo sounds like edgy kid. Eiji is rebellious. He disagrees with the status quo and current society and is mercilessly hounded by his teacher for it. To an extent, you can sympathize with him, and he's the underdog here as well, as clearly he's the morally correct character since he's facing this horrible system. A problem arises though, as Eiji isn't very smart and he's kind of annoying. He often just shouts at things and gets frustrated, which makes everything come across as very silly. I can fully understand being angry at this system. It's unfair, immoral, and infuriating, but it's dialed up to 11 immediately, and it presents a lot of ethical and political ideas that gets no room to breathe. It constructs this greenhouse made of glass with all of these fragile ethical dilemmas, and then U19 begins to throw bricks at it. One of these bricks is the relationship between Eiji and the main heroine, Akari. They both like each other and decided they would marry as kids. It's saccharine but is kind of nice, but this quickly gets upended due to eugenics. Some individuals come to the school to predetermine what letter grades all the children will have. These characters also wear armbands, which I know is something that does appear in Japanese works often, but it's also synonymous with Nazis, and couple that with the eugenics, and things are not so subtle. Akari is graded as a triple S rank and must now transfer to a better school. Despite Eiji's insistence that they'd be married, he gets laughed at, this creepy fat bastard shoots him and then escorts his bride-to-be away. Ignoring the fact that Akari has now become a trophy prize, a literal triple S gacha waifu to be won, this is all very cringe-inducing, and it gets worse when, due to extreme levels of stress Eiji has gone through, he develops his secret power, and in this world, the battle system hinges on abilities called libido. The fact that it's called this just adds to how cringe-inducing the manga is to read. Seeing children beat each other up and yell about their libidos, about dismantling governments and beating the evil adults is very hard to take seriously. After the rooftop event, Eiji is knocked out by a glasses-wearing kid called Nanami, who takes him to his secret underground headquarters of Garage Kid, a group of kids who want to use the power of their libido to take down the government. The next arc then follows Eiji as he deposes the teacher from the beginning, and the kids stage a plan to get him fired, which ends up being a little fucked up. It works, but like most of U19, it feels a bit tone deaf and it doesn't fully think through the implications of what it's doing. Maybe staging some kind of sexual based abuse isn't great actually, or maybe do allude to that since people in power often do engage with that type of abuse as well. It just feels like a big missed opportunity to me, but I'm expecting far too much from U19 to tackle its topics with any amount of grace. We also get to see the school where Akari has gone to and get even more info on the villain's plan to take over the entire world and breed Japanese people with superior genes. Also, these kids at the posh school get paired up and are monitored with these chokers 24/7, which is just another little evil thing to add to the pile. And it really likes doing this. It loves piling these evil ideas on top of each other to create the worst edgy young adult dystopia ever written. It even has an angsty NTR thing going on with these forced partnerships, but of course Eiji infiltrates Akari's school to save her. We're introduced to more characters with a variety of libido powers, like being impervious to bullets or creating some sound wave based attacks, and I think it's pretty wild all the adults are legitimately trying to gun them all down with guns, and even a tank at one point. This is where Eiji and Garage Kid members go to escape, leaving Akari behind, but I'm pretty sure the series at this point in the manga had been cancelled, so they just don't end up leaving and instead get attacked by a UFO housing an evil genetically enhanced teenager who's the perfectly genetically modified human. Our heroes struggle to beat him, but eventually they manage to get the drop on him, and as he's melting away, the big bad of the series just activates a self-destruct from inside of him. Again, it's over the top and cartoonishly evil. They really don't need to establish anymore that the bad guys are evil, but they keep making them even more evil. More of these genetically modified humans then show up, as well as more Garage Kid members, including the chairman and the kids from before, who we never learned much about. Everything is thrown out at this point, including a huge bomb which is grabbed by the leader, whose libido power is to become super giant and strong. We get a whole backstory, power explanation, and a sad revelation that when he uses his powers he shortens his lifespan, but all of this is crammed into less than a chapter, and we literally just met the guy like last chapter, so there is no reason to care about any of this. They then recruit some of those genetically modified perfect humans, and then use a convenient warp ability to get out of there, and the truth of Garage Kid's rebellion begins to spread. Sagawa, Akari's supposed partner, then gets cucked suddenly when Eiji shows up out of nowhere to take her back again, and then we get a backstory for Sagawa showing he's a super incel, and he then develops a libido power of his own, which are big scissors to cut Eiji's thread. I hadn't mentioned previously, but Eiji's libido power is this thread-based power, a bit like Stone Free from JoJo. It's versatile and pretty neat, even having some fun thematic depth, connecting to the concept of the red thread and the idea of thread binding people together. His ability is connection, but the whole thing with giving this guy giant scissors, again, is indicative of how cringe U19 is, with how direct it is with its theming and everything else. I think in some worlds it could have been a really fun and over-the-top battle action manga, but its approach just doesn't really allow for that, with it juggling all of these weird ethical questions and stuff with all of the cringe high school eugenic bullshit. Eiji then talks no jutsu Sagawa by saying they aren't enemies because they both mutually like Akari, so they then have a fist fight to determine who loves her the most and deserves her. It's gross, dumb, and misogynistic bullshit that I feel doesn't really mesh with U19's other kind of progressive views. There's then some vague time skipping, the struggle continues on, the story is incomplete, and we get some text boxes that just say as long as there is a powerful enemy that needs to be defeated, Garage Kid will save the day, and I guess you could say that we're forever U19? But what does that mean? Because all it means to me is that this manga was under 19 chapters because it's a pile of shit.
Know your fucking place, trash.
I'm not going to beat around the bush with U19, it fully deserved to be axed. It's a horrible manga with a myriad of problems and it's frustrating to read all the way through, despite being quite short. U19 has a major problem with its allocation of text and information. It's far too dense to enjoy, and it piles on info about its world and characters' predicaments to an extent where it's physically draining to read. It also adds to the cringe factor I keep mentioning that just kind of sucks you down and pushes on you until you just feel kind of depressed that you're reading this and making a video on it. It's not enough as well that the villains are tyrannical leaders of society, but they also have to be ugly, weird looking freaks, and also have to deal in eugenics, and also make human bombs, and also want to take over the world. It's so hard to take them seriously, and then our heroes are these teens rising up and rebelling. None of the characters have any real personality and either exist to take down the adults or are the adults themselves, the only exceptions being our main hero and heroine as well as Sagawa, whose motivations are to make Akari their trophy wife essentially. It's such a boring, dull and typical drive for this kind of story. It really feels like a YA dystopian novel because it has this fairly contrived and boring romance that gives no real agency to the female character at all. It just serves to make the manga even more cringeworthy by pitting Eiji up against Sagawa. I think topic-wise as well, this is such an odd manga. It may appeal to younger teens, but its subject matter is too complicated and politically focused, and anyone with common sense who's over the age of 16 will probably recognize that U19 is exceptionally corny and not well written, and as mentioned, the sheer girth of its text is off-putting enough that U19 isn't even that fun to read, ironically. U19's position in Shonen Jump is also an interesting one, coming out in 2017 in a batch of 6 other manga, which is pretty famous. The others being We Never Learn, Poro's Demon Diaries, Hungry Marie, Dr.Stone, and Robot X Laserbeam. 2 big hits. Robot X Laserbeam would do okay. Hungry Mary isn't very good, but it's from a respectable author like Robot X Laserbeam, and while Poro didn't do well, the author Hitsuji Gondaira would go on to do Mission Yozakura Family, making Yuji Kimura the only author out of these 6 to find no success. It was the clear dud of its batch at the time where Jump was very open to new series. It had a golden opportunity and plenty of other manga could have been axed instead of it, but it was replaced because it was nowhere near good enough to stay in Jump. Thankfully, I haven't suffered alone through this and have brought all the suffering that entails when reading U19 into my Discord server, so we're going to read through some other people's thoughts. We have a mix of short responses, some genuine in-depth criticism, and even a 19-page essay on the topic, making this one of the most discussed axe manga so far. To start, we have Random OP Analyzer, who said Chapter 1 is extremely painful, which it is, and I told people up front that they don't have to read all of U19 because it was that bad, and plenty of people, I think, didn't even read past the first chapter for good reason. Crash, without much elaboration, said it isn't as bad as people make it out to be, but is still bad. After rereading it, I don't know about that actually, I think it really is that bad. Propagande actually praises it somewhat for some of its ideas, its great antagonists, don't know about that, and decent protagonists, although I really wouldn't agree with this. I'm glad at least someone has something positive to say about it though. Shiranasu brings up the valid point that U19 has more substance and is better than SWAT, which I agree with. Both are pretty horrendous though. Full Metal also says they had more fun reading U19 than SWAT too. which seemed to be the general consensus on the server, so at least it isn't the most hated manga we've ever covered. Full Metal also gave us a more in-depth review and some interesting view of it as a sort of great example of an axed manga generally. It presents ideas and the promise of a story. You can see how it could be appealing and how it could develop, but in real time you get to see it not do that due to bad execution of ideas and poor pacing. Generally, its premise is something they bring up multiple times as something that could be interesting, but is mishandled and cringe-inducing instead. It's hard to take seriously or care about, it's easier to just laugh at instead. Just Anime also finds a majority of what it has to offer cringe, and says what I think a lot of others think when it comes to U19. It's something I would have come up with when I was 7. I've tried to avoid saying a variation of this phrase to not come across as too mean, and also because I think it's a very low-hanging fruit, but it really does feel like this. The premise, while juggling some fairly heavy ethical ideas here and there, is childish, especially in how it's executed too, so I see why a lot of people might want to say something along the lines of, "It feels like a 12-year-old wrote this." Zenomat says it feels like it's trying to ride MHA's coattails, which is a very unique response from the pile. I can see why you'd think that though, with MHA's rising popularity at the time, and the similarities to libidos and quirks, though I don't think it's the most solid comparison ever. Gaming Ghost gave us a string of replies showing their experience with U19, which was not a positive one. First off, they rightly criticize its pacing, since the core conflict doesn't really begin properly until chapter 3, when Akari is taken. I agree that the first 3 chapters needed to be combined, and that Garage Kid should have appeared earlier. The adult party get too much setup, and it does re-establish itself way too many times. I think Gaming Ghost is right on the money, with U19 wanting to tackle some pretty lofty topics like abuse of power, abuse of status, and general stuff on society, ethics, and fairness of things, but it approaches it with a massive hammer that's so comical you can't take it seriously. Though there is some positives they praise, like the powers and art, which others tend to agree on too. I don't think I mentioned the art too much, but it is pretty good, especially for a rookie mangaka. Next up, Harley the Apothecary comes in calling it genuinely insufferable, and honestly, I think I'll just read the rest of what they had to say verbatim, because I think it's a great summary of the insanity U19 can put you through. Every page was cringier than the last. The power system being called libido is genuinely the least dumb thing about it. The guy and the girl had no chemistry. Everything about the way the world fell to ruin screams 15-year-old edgelord who doesn't understand how the world works. The melodrama is annoying. The mini arc about the teacher makes no sense to me. The school suddenly pretends to have principles when they accuse the guy of sexual assault. Why didn't they accuse him of that before? The baseball friend was lame. The gases guy was lame. But then they shut the fuck up about how much grown-ups suck for a second to have a prison break arc, but with knockoff stand powers, and it rules. The side characters are kind of fun. The love interest gains a personality, and it's just batshit insane nonsense start to end. Guy tanks a tank. Girl brings around a microphone just to look cool. The villains are parading around in a fucking UFO. Girl drops a whale on a jet. The villains drop a nuke on a guy. Guy eats the nuke and then throws a tank. It's honestly great. I think this is a good overall summary of the U19 experience, and I have to thank Harley for just summarizing how batshit insane the manga is in this little paragraph. I also get that some of this can be appealing with how crazy it all is, though for me, reading it again, it was all a bit much, and I think maybe if you just read half of the words and just sped read through it, it might be a little bit of fun. They also had an additional comment where they said it didn't feel cluttered and confusing, which I'm gonna disagree on, because after reading it again all the way through, I did still find it quite cluttered and confusing, and a big part of that is just due to its pacing and the overabundance of text. Porsche could barely be bothered to keep going after the first chapter, stating the character writing was downright heinous and that they couldn't get invested in anything, with the adult party being characteristically super evil. And again, I really don't blame anyone for not reading past chapter 1, since this manga especially is really bad. which Sarah only finished U19 for the X-Files read-through, and I'm sorry, and they kind of nail it all on the head by saying that it looked like U19 was trying to say something about fascism and abuse of power, but the bad guys are so inhumane it just becomes unrealistic, which they are, and it's hard to tackle the topics U19 brings up because things are stretched to such an extreme degree. They bring up some plot holes too, as well as the fact that most of Garage Kid seems to stay put until the final assault, which really puts into question what exactly they've been doing. They do indeed feel quite non-committal and not very well fleshed out. Bree chimed in too, calling U19 an uncomfortable mess, saying it had something going for it with its allegory of aggression and how Japanese children are pushed too far to reach success, but it overcomplicates itself to the extent that it just dissipates, which I think is a pretty nuanced take, taking into account some more Japanese cultural ideas. Cactus ended up describing U19 as a cringe cube that was filled with a clusterfuck of a battle system, uninteresting characters, and approached its ideas awkwardly with the grace of an elephant in a china shop. And finally, among all the comments I got, I think one stuck out the most, and for good reason, and that was from Andrew, who is possibly one of the biggest U19 fans to exist, and his connections to the series go deeper than most, with their brother being the fan translator of U19, so we have them to thank for us all reading this, and I genuinely mean thank you, even though I don't think it's a pleasant experience for most people, but still, translating manga like this is really important to me, especially this channel, and I think the general Shonen Jump fan base. So again, thank you very much. Alongside this, though, Andrew made a 19-page document full of their thoughts on U19, as well as axed manga in a bit more of a general sense, and how they express their ideas, as well as how people perceive those ideas and react accordingly. It's a really interesting read, which I'll try to link down below, and I think anyone seasoned in Jump will enjoy it for all the connections Andrew makes with all sorts of manga, from modern hits like JJK and Kagurabachi to more obscure references like Demon's Plan. There's a lot to unpack here, and honestly it could be a whole video by Andrew, but my main takeaway from Andrew is that if someone is able to write so much, so in depth and with such care, then it must have touched someone deeply. Even though U19 is one of the X manga I've treated with the most negativity, I still want to convey that the spirit of these videos is to explore these works and acknowledge that they do mean something to someone. Andrew brings up Red Hood in his document, the very first X-File I made, and that's a very polarizing manga which has its fans and naysayers. But still the fact remains that Red Hood existed, it's a piece of art and a story with ideas it's trying to convey, and while it might not have conveyed things well, just like U19, it still had potential to touch others. And even though U19 might have been a huge mess, it did try, it makes for some fun discussion, and it has left its own lasting legacy on Jump in its own weird way. Even though it is one of the worst things to come from Jump, there's still value in that, and I don't know, there's something special in that. Post U19, Yuji Kimura hasn't done much else. He did one shot for Jump Giga in 2018's summer issue called Complete Funeral, and then in 2021 a Jump Plus one-shot that sees a girl in a courtroom run by angels and devils debating on whether she should go to hell for suicide. The whole idea of a courtroom drama set between heaven and hell sounds really fun, but a topic like suicide should be treated carefully with great consideration, and by the looks of things that doesn't seem to be the case here, and it further shows Yuji Kimura's penchant for tackling bold subjects without putting too much thought into them, I think. He also has an active Twitter account where he posts some pretty sick fan art too, so I'll try to link that in the description as well. Surprisingly, there is a bit more to discuss on U19, as it's had an interesting legacy related to Shonen Jump in a more meta community sense. I'm of course referring to the U19 Club. The U19 Club refers to manga that are under 19 chapters from Shonen Jump, taking the manga's namesake, its perceived lack of quality and overall silliness, and turning it into a badge of dishonor. It helps that U19 also had under 19 chapters, and the page introducing Garage Kid is often used as a meme template, switching the characters out to various X manga as a form of welcoming recent U19 X's to the club. These are a lot of fun if you're really into reading all the Jump manga that have come out, especially ACT stuff, since it's a long running gag that just gets better the deeper into Shonen Jump you are. The meme is still alive and well to this day, and getting U19'd is a commonish phrase you'll hear in the Jump manga community. People wonder if X series will get U19'd, as it's usually an indicator of very poor reception and quality, or an indication of how ruthless Jump is with its axes. For a period of 2020 onwards, U19s were less common for a bit, but they've picked up recently with manga like Shadow Eliminators being 19 chapters exactly, just dodging the U19 label. And then we have Saikao, Steer Anemone, and Necromance all getting U19'd in a row, which has resulted in some more modern variations of the memes. It's an interesting legacy to have, but it makes being a fan of Jump manga a bit funnier, so even though U19 is a train wreck of a manga, I have to thank it for the start of the U19 Club at the very least. And that's all we have on U19, one of Shonen Jump's most notorious manga, and I have finally been able to put it to rest and I won't have to talk about it again, so I hope you've enjoyed my coverage of it. If you did, please subscribe and check out the other Axe files here on the channel. There's a ton of them on various Axe manga, which I'm sure you'd enjoy. I also have my History of Shonen Jump series, where I look back in time to the older manga that filled the magazine, which you might have fun with. But if you really like what I make, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps a ton and you can help influence the direction of the channel a bit. Alongside this, you can listen to the Patreon exclusive Trent Talks podcast at any tier, and you'll get to be thanked at the end of my videos, with you getting your own little doodle at the $3 tier, like Kinocha, Jade, Kaizukugaru, Sorokol Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, and also AB, Vako Draws, and Otaku Gamer X at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.